Hello and welcome back to The Quiet Exit. Welcome back to episode 3 of The Quiet Exit. I am your host, Monique LaSalle, psychology researcher and the author of an upcoming book titled Seen and Unheard. And today's episode is about something many of us survivors don't expect. And that's the identity crisis that follows narcissistic abuse. This isn't just about pain. It's about confusion and standing in the mirror and not recognizing yourself anymore. I know for me, it took several years before I could even look at myself in the mirror. There are times I would get up, go to work, get dressed, go to work. Of course, I'd look in the mirror to do my face, but I never looked in the mirror to look at the reflection and examine myself. So when I finally did, I didn't recognize myself. And that's what we're unpacking today. Who were you before them? You see, narcissistic abuse doesn't just break your heart. It rewires your reality. When someone chips away at your intuition, criticizes your decisions, erases your needs, and projects their wounds onto you, you begin to fragment. You disconnect from your gut. Your memory gets fuzzy. And your personality starts to shapeshift just to stay safe. And when it's over, you don't just grieve the relationship, right? You grieve the version of yourself you lost inside of it. I have this saying I've been saying for a few years now. No one takes a walk through hell willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, and comes out the other side the same. It's just impossible. And that's what I consider the dynamic hell. The psychology of self-erosion. Let's jump into a little data. According to trauma researchers like Judith Harmon and Bessel van der Kolk, and hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, prolonged emotional abuse impacts your sense of identity, memory, and your embodiment. It creates this hypervigilance. You may experience disassociation, and you're in a chronic state of fight, flight, fawn. In narcissistic abuse, this is often reinforced through gaslighting, where the abuser repeatedly denies your reality, causing you to question what you know, what you feel, and who you are. Over time, many survivors adopt the coping strategy of identity forfeiture. And what that is prematurely closing off your own development in favor of keeping peace, playing a role, and earning conditional safety. And I'll paint a picture. I do have two examples. Of course, there's many more, but two. One was the very first example, which was also a betrayal. And if you missed that episode, check out episode 2, where I briefly go over betrayal. But I was much younger, probably in my early teens. And all my life, I love to read and I love to write. And not necessarily write fiction. I'm a writer of nonfiction. I take life and put it into words on paper. That's why podcasting is something new for me, because it's taking words and speaking them to an audience, where I am used to writing thoughts, feelings, what I see, what I observe around me, and putting it in the journal. But when I was younger, about 13, 14, somewhere around there, I received a phone call. And the phone call was from a neighbor boy, who was a friend of mine at the time. And he stated to me something to the effect of, "My mother wanted me to let you know she didn't read your diary." And I'm confused. I don't know what he's talking about. So, of course, I asked for clarification. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he then explained to me that my parent found my journal, made photocopies of specific pages in my journal and mailed it out to maybe 6, 7 neighbors, including him and his mother. And she wanted me to know that she did not read it. Betrayal wasn't the word. I was confused. I didn't understand why that was even done. And I'll give you a little tidbit. Fast forward 30 years later, that same parent said that they would never do that. And that's a violation of privacy. The parent stated, "My problem is that I like to write too much." And so again, that deflection back on me, that was my fault. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What occurred was, after the second time that happened, because that wasn't the first, 10 to 15 years later, it happened again. And then I forfeited writing ever again. Right? To keep peace, because obviously as a child growing up, in your early 20s growing up, this must have been a bad behavior. It's subconsciously is what I had to be thinking, right? And that's what an example of forfeiture of your identity. Reading and writing is my passion. I love it. I forfeited that. I put that aside. I buried it to keep peace. The second incident is during my marriage, returning back to college. I was, not that it impacted anything in the household. I still cooked, cleaned, took care of my son, and was home. But returning back to college, what was the word? The term was impacted his household. I forfeited returning back to college to keep the peace. See the pattern of behavior? It's learned from when I was younger. I repeat it again throughout my marriage. And that's just to explain, to paint the picture, okay? Identity forfeiture. Now that I got that out the way, I digress. So when you start reclaiming yourself, the identity crisis isn't a sign of weakness, right? I need that to be very clear. What it is it's a sign you're finally safe to ask, who am I really? You may start realizing you don't like the things you pretended to like. You don't want the roles you were handed. You're tired of being silent, agreeable, and invisible. This reclamation can feel terrifying. And I do mean it does feel terrifying for you listeners out there. I understand. I felt it too. Because for so long, your identity was built for survival, not authenticity. You were living someone else's story, the character they created in their mind for you. The thing is, your real self never left. It was just buried under masks you were forced to wear. It's okay to grieve who you had to become in order to be loved, protected, or accepted. That version of you was brilliant, adaptive, and necessary. But now it's safe to unlearn the performance. You get to create new boundaries. You get to rewrite your story. And you get to be someone you actually recognize again. I'm going to leave you with a closing reflection. If you're in the thick of an identity crisis after a narcissistic abuse, please know this. You're not lost. You're resurfacing. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. You're not who they told you you are. You're who you decide to become. And you don't have to become her or him loudly. Until next time, take the quiet exit if you need to. You don't owe anyone the performance of staying.